All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, day 21, episode 22 of 40 days of 4VKM. And I told you guys that we were going to talk about a very interesting character today, very controversial character. A lot of people not sure, about this guy, feel a certain way about this guy. He's no longer with us, though. R.I.P. to this guy. So we won't speak ill of the dead. Instead, I'm just going to share my experience with this person. So, not to make anybody's mind up or tell anybody else how to think about him, but at the very least, just share my experience with the whole deal, right? So, the episode is 4VKM meets negative 48. And it was released on 8/22/2021. And the timestamp just so happens to be 11/22. Beautiful number there, right? Well, not so much sometimes, but depending on how you look at it, right? So, so this was a very interesting situation. If you guys remember 2021, a lot of people got censored off of Twitter and YouTube and all this other stuff. And then, these other platforms emerged. This is really when Telegram first emerged, right? And then, before really Spaces and any of that stuff, there was these Telegram chats that people were doing, right? So there was a guy that was on there whose voice sounded very familiar to anybody that was kind of tracking the JFK Jr. type of stuff, right? It sounded very familiar, right? And a lot of people speculated on who this person was, right? Their knowledge, their information that they were giving was very interesting. And their kind of specialty was Gematria, right? And kind of teaching people how Gematria works and, how it's kind of used in the Q drops. They go back to, I think it was drop 40, where they basically outline A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. Boom, that's simple Gematria for you right there, right? So that was kind of what he would point to as far as, it's part of the drops, right? Q drop 40. If you take a look at it, talking about Gematria, right? So I had kind of always used a little bit of that stuff in my videos up to this point. Not a ton of it, but just some basic ones that I knew. And I didn't understand the full picture of Gematria. So, and I will say that, I'm convinced without a shadow of a doubt that it's used. It was used within WWE. It's used when, people are trying to talk through news articles or through news headlines. To try to get secret messages out. I do believe that it is almost like a modern day version of Morse code, right? So you have this Gematria thing, right, going on, and this guy's kind of teaching all about it, right? Now I jump on, and this is my first instance in the chat that they were doing, and I asked a question there, and my question was basically like, hey man, you always talk about all these people who died who aren't actually dead. And, the one thing that they are killing, that they always kill WWE and Vince McMahon on, is the amount of wrestlers that died at a young age, right? Now, we know that it's a very physical lifestyle. We know that it's a very brutal lifestyle between the time that's spent on the road and then the time taking bumps and rings and all that other stuff. Not good, right? And then a lot of wrestlers get addicted to pain medications, right? Unfortunately, sometimes that gets mixed up with alcohol, and you just have a bad disaster at the end of the day, right? I'd say probably the number one cause of death with the wrestlers that did pass away for the most part, heart attacks, right? One way or another. And, there's a lot of drops that say heart attacks can be deadly, and they are, right? So, so I always found that interesting, and I kind of pointed it out to negative 48 and said, hey, you always talk about all these people. Is it possible that some of these wrestlers that have passed away, maybe they haven't, maybe they're working in dual roles, or they're in witness protection, or whatever the case be? So that's kind of how the conversation starts, right? So we talk about Vince McMahon and Trump's history, their relationship together. And, he knew a lot of stuff off the top of his head, which I was impressed with. The first thing being the Battle of the Billionaires, how Trump and McMahon each had a wrestler. and he explained some stuff that I had never thought. I always knew that fact. I've talked about it in multiple episodes before, so you guys have heard me say this. But he focuses on Bobby Lashley, and he uses his initials, right? It's BL, which is 2 and 12, right? And 212, as you would call it, it comes out when you spell it out. 212 comes out to 150. Trump Train 150. Okay, that could be just a coincidence, right? But it's kind of cool regardless of that. And then obviously the other wrestler is UMAGA. You make America great again, right? You make America great again. So again, this was 2007. So this was 8 years before Trump decided he was running for president. And really it was a very interesting time considering all the stuff that happened afterwards, right? So he's kind of making those connections there and kind of talking about how Vince McMahon and Donald Trump, they're doing this silly shit that you wouldn't normally see billionaires do, right? A hair versus hair match, right? Where one of them would get their head shaved off at the end of the day. And of course, that ended up being McMahon. So because Trump doesn't lose, right? So, and Trump wasn't going to shave his head, right? So everybody knew it was going to be Vince. But it was fun to say regardless, right? So then, going back to my initial question, hey, do you think there's any wrestlers that could still be alive? He didn't say for sure that this was the case, but he said it would be cool if Roddy Piper still was, right? And the interesting part about that is Roddy Piper, he had the movie They Live, right? And that's kind of like, hey, are they alive? They live, right? So, and if you remember that movie, that's like a cult classic, right? They just had, just so many beautiful little gems in there, basically showing the fake news, how fake it is, right? Like anytime he would put his sunglasses on, he'd see like these reptilian-looking skeleton people behind the news cameras, right? He'd put them off, he'd take them off, and he'd see what everybody else sees, which is, regular people giving you the news, right? He would put the glasses on and look at billboards. And the billboards, it would be like a nice, advertisement for a product or something. Hey, buy this. This will be nice for you, right? And then he'll put the glasses on and it will say something like, obey, buy this, right? Something like that, right? So it's kind of exposing the reality, the Matrix, if you want to say it, right? Roddy Piper was big into that long before people were ever really talking about it, right? So, and I mentioned it in one of the other videos as well. What did Roddy Piper tweet out shortly before he had passed away? He said, They Live it's not a movie, it's a documentary, right? So, very interesting. Just like how people say The Matrix is like a documentary as well. So he points out a couple of Gematria examples when it comes to They Live, right? Sunglasses equals 136, and Great Awakening equals 136. So I thought that was a nice little tie-in right there. One of the main phrases or themes in They Live is obey. And obey became kind of like a cult icon also. If you ever remember the pictures of Andre the Giant, and it would say obey underneath, right? And it was like a graphic that would pop up all over places, stickers, whatnot. People would paint it. And it was Andre, and it would say obey, right? And obey equals 47. Well, John equals 47, right? So, obey John, obey. There's a lot of other 47s out there, but, this guy's good at the damn Gematria stuff, right? So, I point out also one of the things, generally this theme is always about two presidents for the most part. It's about President Kennedy, this guy right here, and President Trump, right? Now, if you take a look at them, that's President 35 and President 45, right? So just take the numbers there. 3 plus 5 plus 4 plus 5, you get 17, right? So isn't that fun that the two people that we say are the starter and the finisher, either way you want to look at it, when you take the numbers of the POTUS they were, it equals 17. And this is like a whole 17 operation that we talk about, right? So it's interesting to say the least. I say that a lot, don't I? But, so we talk more about some of the wrestling connections here. And he mentions Biden, and he mentions how Biden's really not the real president. and how that's actually James Woods wearing a mask and a voice modulator. And in the video, I show you Kane, who's now the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, who President Trump just shouted out. Kane, he was there supporting him in Iowa. He also shouted out The Undertaker in that clip as well. So, that was just like a couple weeks ago, right? So, I thought that was pretty awesome. But he talks about, so I'm showing you, Kane wore a mask, and before he took the mask off, he didn't really speak a lot. And when he did speak, he would use one of those voice modulators, right? So, I always thought it was interesting. Here you got people walking around in masks and fake voice modulators, and like that was in WWF years ago with Kane, right? So who knows? Maybe they're not fake masks and voice modulators, but there's definitely some anomalies, especially with that Joe Biden guy. Remember when he had ball sack chin for a couple days, right? So I don't know how you explain stuff like that when it keeps happening, right? So we talk about Junior a little bit. We talk about the number 23 because it was WrestleMania 23 where Trump and McMahon faced off, right? So WrestleMania 23, Trump versus McMahon. And if you take those numbers, 23, they've always been associated within the movement as pain, right? And I don't know where that comes from because the gematria for pain is not 23, but it would always be 23 equals the pain. And, so that's interesting. But if you break down that number 23, take 7/16 as an example, right? That's the day of the plane crash. 7 plus 16 equals 23. So I was like, wow, I never heard that before, right? Junior had taken the bar. He failed it twice, passed it on the third time. So you have another 2 and another 3 right there. He talks about Mike Pence, Mike Pounce, as we like to call him, right? And that, again, goes back to what I say is, one of the biggest proofs that happened in this whole thing. Everybody thought Mike Pence was on the team, right? And then until we knew he wasn't anymore, right? And then what ends up happening, he runs for president against President Trump, thinking he could do a better job, right, in 2024 recently. Obviously, that didn't work out for him, but that's what he was thinking at the time. So he lays out how Trump had always picks the music at the rallies, which is, kind of obvious, right? But they're very commie in a lot of instances too, right? As far as comms and messages being used through the music choices that are being made. And what Negative 48 was saying is that, look, that is Trump making those calls right there. And when they announced that they were running for re-election in Orlando for the 2020 campaign, he had Mike Pence, however you want to say it, come out to a Bad Company song, right? And I actually think, who's the actual band for it? It's not actually Bad Company, but they became Bad Company, or they were Bad Company and changed to somebody else. I forget what it is, but same people essentially, right? So Bad Company, you have BC. BC is 2-3. There's another 23 for you right there. But then when you break it down even further, Bad Company, Bad is 7, Company is 87. So you add them up, you get 94. 94 is John, and that's who he says, and who a lot of people think is actually the vice president, or will be the vice president, or VP behind the scenes, or whatever the case is, right? So it's interesting. So Pence comes out Bad Company because he's Bad Company, right? And a lot of people didn't think so. A lot of people thought Pence was a good guy, right? But I think we knew when D5 happened, Mr. Pence got his letter, or as some people call it, the golden ticket, that Pence was not a good guy. So you got Pence, you got Cappy, Isaac Cappy, right? So R.I.P. to him, whatever happened to that guy. But he had made a video one time saying that Junior was going to change the world, and it's going to be really cool, and it's going to suck that he's not going to be around to see it. So kind of prophetic, that not being around to see it part. Hopefully the rest of it comes true as well, right? But, Cappy had an investigator that had looked into Pence, and according, again, to Negative 48, he was the only one that had been given that permission to basically, disclose that Pence was a bad guy and, some of the bad stuff that he had done. So check the video out. We kind of lined it up with They Live a little bit, because you're looking at Mike Pence. He looks straight as an arrow, right? But put the glasses on and you're going to get a totally different Mike Pence right there. So don't forget to bring your glasses, right? Another interesting thing that I thought that he said was the fact that, we're always concerned about the Democrats, right? Now, a lot of people in this movement weren't always lifelong Republicans. I wasn't a Democrat either. I just was politically neutral, if you want to call it that. I wasn't really impressed with any politician until President Trump showed up. And I was like, wow, this guy's, kind of like the man, right? President Trump even, he wasn't a Republican his whole life. He was a Democrat. Ronald Reagan was a Democrat at one point as well, or a liberal, however you want to say it. So anyway, he's talking about the swamp monsters and how we're always, railing on the Democrats. But don't forget, the Republican swamp is just as bad, right? And you had all these RNC swamp monsters that were surrounding Trump and just trying to suck from the teat, right? And obstruct him wherever they could and do whatever they could to try to bring this guy down at the end of the day, right? Or to, to bring the will of the Uni-Party together, right? Because ultimately that's what it is. It's a Uni-Party. The Democrats and the Republicans, they work together. Not in the interest of us, the American people, but in the interest of their political donors, however you want to phrase it from there. But yeah, on the big important issues, they always vote the same, right? So, but the stuff that actually matters to us, they never want to give it to us, right? So, just how it works. So, if you remember during the Trump administration, it was like a revolving door of personnel, right? You'd always have people come in, come out. It was like a revolving door. The Scaramucci model, as they like to call it, right? Scaramucci was there for like 17 days or something like that before he gets whacked out of communications director or whatever the hell he was, right? But you just had this revolving door of swamp monsters coming through. How about John Bolton, right? People would be like, why the hell did they hire this guy? One after another, he would bring them in, basically find out, what their deal is, almost be like the tour guides of the swamp, right? So use them for their information, use them for their connections, and then dispose of them and replace it with somebody else, right? So I always thought that was interesting because it's true. He did move through a lot of people right there. And sometimes you'd be like, why did he hire this person? And I think that's the best way to think about it is that, especially when it comes to Senate confirmed positions, right? There's only X amount of people that the Senate is going to allow you to pick for a position. They're just not going to let you to pick anybody, right? You have to get both sides to agree on it. And actually, the interesting thing I thought was super interesting is that out of all the Senate confirmation picks that President Trump had, at least in the first, in the very early going, Linda McMahon had like the best vote out of any of the confirmations. They gave her like a 98% or 98 votes out of 100 for Linda McMahon to lead the Small Business Administration. So I thought that was interesting how she kind of got like, greenlit both parties in that instance. And I even think her Connecticut rivals that she ran against voted for her in that position as well. Now, maybe you could argue, hey, it's Small Business Administration, who cares? But there's a lot of other picks that just don't get anywhere near that vote. And I want to say Linda had the biggest margin for her Senate confirmation. So, nice job, Linda. You're a winner. You're a winner, right? So, he's talking about how this is like kind of just one big game of chess. Donald Trump's playing 5D chess right here. And I said, you know what? I kind of agree with you because I kind of had that epiphany, and I've talked about it, when I realized that Trump was the host of WrestleMania 4 and 5. That was kind of like a red pill moment for me because I was like, what are the odds that he hosted 4 and 5 and then became POTUS 45? He's always wearing the 45 on the hat. He's always got the, he's following 45 on Twitter. All these 45 different things, right? And it was when I was a kid, I guess that's when it ingrained in me. When I first started watching wrestling, there's a VHS tape that came out that covered all the WrestleManias prior to my first WrestleMania that I watched on TV. So 1 through 14. And in that VHS when I was a little kid. That's when I saw it. Because they would make it a big deal. They'd be like, oh, Donald Trump, he was the only person to host back-to-back WrestleManias. And I knew those WrestleManias were 4 and 5. So it's like, yeah, they've been planning this for a long time. And when you even look at the fact that Trump, around that same time in the 80s, he's on with Oprah, he's on with Larry King, all these people, he's talking politics. He's talking what he would do if he was president of the United States. It's very, very, very interesting. So, that brought in Hammer Girl. Shout out to Hammer Girl. She does a health Telegram channel, I think. So check that out, Hammer Girl. I think she's still doing it. And she kind of talks about how, I had dropped that last video with the helicopter crash. And, they were decoding that in the -48 chat. And they thought that was super interesting and a lot of stuff there. Now, I had mentioned that the number on the tail was 188. Well, 188 is President Kennedy, I believe. It's 188, right? So, because President's 110 and Kennedy's 78. So, boom, you got 188 right there on the helicopter that Shane McMahon went down in. So, some 120s come up, right? I thought it was interesting when I was getting into Gematria. I was like, oh, what's my Twitter name, right? It's Mr. Drew ENT, right? Well, that comes out to 120. I'm like, well, that's okay. Is there any other 120s? Vince McMahon is 120. Wow, Vince McMahon is 120. Holy shit. The Truth is 120. And what do we put in the videos? From the message WWE? The truth will be heard, right? So Mr. Drew ENT will be heard. Vince McMahon will be heard. It's just a nice little sync right there, as we like to call it. And I like to say, man, anywhere you see numbers now, you kind of feel like they mean something, right? So when we look at 716, we were saying how that adds up to 23. 7 plus 16 is 23. Well, I've always told you guys, my birthday, it's 617. It's the mirror of that, 617. Same thing. You add those up, it equals 23 as well. Now, the one thing that I had never considered or thought about ever before was the fact that, and this is pointed out by -48 in this clip, that, the date, 90% of the world writes the date not as 617, but as 176. So 176 is 176, right? So is there any good 176s out there? Well, my full name is actually 176. So that freaked me out because then I'm like, wait a minute. So my name, my first and last name, my date of birth, and the area code that I was born in are kind of all the same. That's kind of interesting, right? But then he points out, there's another 176. Hey, you're 176, and, Trump's 88, Jay Kennedy is 88. Add them up together, you get 176. And I'm like, wow, what are the odds of that? 40-year plan is 176. I didn't know that when I wrote the 40-year plan, when I named, the first episode that. So it gets very, very interesting. So the last thing I'll say, just, outside of the video, is that there's going to be another couple episodes with -48 in it. He had passed away last year in June 30th, I think it was. And, before that, about a week before that was my birthday, and he had sent me a Gematria decode that equaled, it was like some sort of happy birthday message, and it equaled 617. So, I always found it super interesting. He sent that, and then just a week later, he had gotten into his accident. So, again, RIP to -48. I know not everybody was a huge fan, but I think he did play a role. There isn't even a Q drop that says -48 in it. When I saw that, I was like, whoa, maybe there's something to this guy, because that had come out long before -48 showed up on the scene. And the last thing I'll say, from my personal experience, right? And again, I could be wrong. This could be my imagination, right? But I do feel like the person that I spoke to on that Telegram chat that day was different from the person that emerged in Dallas. I feel like they were different people. I could be wrong about all that, and some people will argue that I'm wrong, but just from my gut instinct, I feel like I talked to somebody different on Telegram than the person that I would talk to afterwards on the phone. I never met him in person. I know a lot of people had, right? But I do think that, there's a couple things in the voices that were different, right? And then there's a couple things in the memory and just conversations had that were different as well. So we'll get into that when we get into a couple more episodes that where the bloodline pops up. And what a lot of people don't know is that those documentaries that came out, that Negative 48 had put out with Sacred Blue Tent, I actually edited those. They had asked me to edit those, and I spent a whole weekend before they all showed up in Dallas getting those two films put together, and they were like long. It was like 2-3 hour documentaries that I had to put together in like a span of a week. I took vacation from work that week to get it done, right? But I felt like it was important work. Not to say I agree with everything in it. I didn't write the Jesus strand. I just edited it for these guys. Made it basically like a long form 4VKM with some of the talents that I have. So you'll learn more about that, and I'm going to kind of give you some inside baseball when it comes to that and what happened after those documentaries were released. It was very interesting, to say the least. So stay tuned for that. We have another couple episodes until we get to that point. But in the meantime, you guys know the drill. The video is going to be in the link below. 4VKM meets Negative 48. Check it out on Rumble. It's actually still on YouTube. But check it out. It makes me wonder, too, why'd they keep that one up? Why'd they let that one stay up? I don't know. But don't forget, subscribe, 4VKM Podcast. That's going to be launching on 2/21/2024. As always, 4VKM.com. You can get all the episodes. And yeah, practice your Gematria. I think it's fun. It's interesting. Some people get too lost into it. I could get lost into it sometimes, right? I've learned to take a step back a little bit from it. But I definitely think it's something that people should understand because I think that it is a important part of the drops and just, kind of the way that the world works. If you have the eyes to see, then sometimes you can see some stuff that you wouldn't normally. So knowledge is power at the end of the day, and it's almost like learning a second language, right? Once you learn it, it just becomes kind of automatic. So RIP Negative 48 wherever you are, and as always, enjoy the show.